Thank you very much for your presentation. Jörg, are you there? Ah, where are you? That looks very exciting. But I also liked your garden, actually.
Thank you very much.
So, do we have questions? So, if so, then please raise your hand. Otherwise, I would have a quick question. I mean, you had in the beginning, you had this example with research data by Rutherford, which indeed is still interesting for science history background. But much of the data that we are producing will at some point be outdated and eventually even not useful anymore. So is there an idea to fade out data at some point? And if so, how this could be realized? What do you think?
Oh, that's a very good question. Thank you.
Thanks. It's very kind of you.
Yeah. So, of course, it's a question that has many facets. And one of the facets is, how do we find the right data, which at the moment gives us the right perspective? However, sometimes we want to have this historic perspective. So deciding to fade out data is a question: do we really delete it, or do we have just the metadata saying, this data is not the newest version, please go to the newest version to get the newest insight? But of course, there's also a second aspect which I'd like to highlight, which I learned in a recent presentation about a large-scale astronomy infrastructure. And there it becomes an economic question, how much data is being kept from the data that is being discovered by the large infrastructure. And it's such a huge volume of data that the question really is, do we keep all the stuff and spend a lot of money on storage, or do we save some of the money by cleverly deciding to delete some of the data points? And actually it's kind of a huge scale experiment. So it becomes a very relevant economic question. And this is only two aspects that might play a role when deciding for a particular data set, if to fade out or if not to fade out. I think the important thing is to come up with a structured process to find the right decision for a given data set. I don't think it's the same answer for all data sets. I would expect that we have different expectations and different needs in science. So therefore, I would not see that there's a one-size-fits-all answer, but maybe there's one process which always leads to the right answer for a given data set.
Okay, thank you.
There's two questions in the Q&A. I don't know, can these be asked live?
I will try to bring Kai live, just as a test.
Yes, I think that worked.
Okay, excellent.
Okay, so my question is a rather political one. So yeah, in order to populate these databases and to have a good data infrastructure, I think you also have to make researchers to populate these databases. And so how are you going to achieve that? So do you want to force them or build incentives, or what are your ideas on how to do that?
Thank you. Also a highly relevant question. And again, there won't be one answer. So I, in my professional past, I visited some different science areas, from computer science, some nature sciences, but also some social sciences. And what I've learned is that the cultures for creating data, for working with data, and for granting access to data are, let's say, different. And it has to do with the simple fact that the kind of data that is produced is different, but also how it is being produced is different. So I would say right now we see many very good, we see many examples how this can be done very effectively. Like in physics, we have large-scale infrastructures, and sometimes you have a globally distributed network of archives which then provide access instantaneously to this data. And very often researchers are part of the process of delivering these research data. We also see that in the social sciences, where we have huge studies which are being conducted by researchers along with infrastructures. And I think this is kind of an ideal combination And therefore, the NFDI currently foresees that in the NFDI consortia, these two groups have to come together to be successful in the evaluation process. So only if you have both infrastructure on the one hand and researchers on the other hand that join the club, usually you would be successful with such a consortium. And that shows already the path. However, the NFDI in the long run needs to create a wave which is much bigger than just the consortia which are being funded. So a relevant question is, how can we engage on a larger scale with the researchers, with the people who are sometimes doing research by themselves and provide some research data, or who work with the data. And this is not an easy thing to do, I think, because in some disciplines, or maybe also some individuals, so sometimes it's on the discipline level, sometimes just on the individual level, there is this, it's my data, I don't want to share it. And this has to do with how reputation is being created in research. Usually you get reputation for publishing papers. It is only in the very early stage that you also get credits for publishing data. And I think if this becomes more common, that you have data publications and that you also get credit for publishing high quality research data, the more this becomes a normality, the more it will be just common, and yeah, it will be just the normal process that researchers provide these data to the public. And I think in the current situation, which has been dominated by the COVID-19 pandemic, we see that many researchers are really willing to donate their data instantaneously and give it to the whole community. And then the global community is evaluating this research. If you're following the German media, you also see that sometimes media create big stories out of that, which seem a bit unfair to the researchers. But I think this is part of a process in which we are at the moment. We have to learn to donate these data, and we have to learn that that getting research results out of that is then part of a larger community. So we have to respect that the authors of the data should also get reputation for that. And then if we have a fruitful collaboration with lots of teams who are evaluating the data and then give back the feedback to the original team, you can come up with high quality data very quickly. And of course, you still can do research on the data and publish studies and do all the stuff that you want to do as a researcher. And I really hope that we can make a significant progress in the NFDI to create this atmosphere of data sharing on a large scale.
All right,
Okay.
thank you. There's another question by Mike Bierwitz.
Yes, it's also a somewhat political question, but on a different level. Of course, the NFDI also relates to the international level, to the European level, and on the European level, there's also the European Open Science Cloud, also just developing, just becoming a real institution. Also structured a little bit differently to the NFDI, maybe a bit less researcher-centered, I feel, I'm not sure. Anyway, so could you already say something about how the relation between these two institutions, NFDI and EOSC, might turn out, what might be planned for that?
Yes, thank you very much. This is part of the mandate of the NFDI. It is part of the mandate to become a network partner in international organizations. And the EOSC, or the European Open Science Cloud, is probably the most important one, maybe right next to the RDA, the Research Data Alliance. The EOSC is in the founding stage, and I'm already part of this process of creating the statutes. I just entered the scene, but yeah, I'm trying to also donate some of my time and contribute as to the best of my knowledge. And the idea is that we are one of the starting partners in the EOSC, because the EOSC will bring together on a European level multiple partners from all the European countries, and the NFDI will be a prominent partner from Germany. There might be also additional partners from Germany. This is a matter of discussion at the moment, who will be members, who will be founding members, and so on and so forth. I don't think it's in the final stage of the discussion, but it's already quite progressed. And it is foreseen that we play a certain central role, just because our nature, the nature of the NFDI is to bring together not all, but as much possible partners from the research areas in Germany as possible. And then this kind of mandates us to play this role as a mandated organization on the European level. And this is where we are currently working on. Probably the EOSC will be founded slightly before our own associations. So we maybe not be an official founding member, but we are in this first batch of organizations to join the EOSC, that's for sure.
There I would like to comment also that the last talk of our conference will be given by Karlsruhe, which is also, he's an important person in the EOSC, and he will detail also some of the EOSC's plans for the future. I also have one. No, I'm sorry, exactly. There's a, also can I have one more question?
Sure.
Chairman, yeah? Okay, my question would be, we had in the very beginning of this event, we had 2 satellite workshops. One of them was organized by the Junge DPG, so the young physicist from Germany, talking about teaching at NFDI. And it's indeed an important fact that people need to be educated about that, in particular young researchers, students. Is there a plan that the Directorate itself will involve in teaching or in foster teaching at universities on data infrastructure and data handling?
Thanks again for the question. The Directorate itself will probably not be part of the teaching. And this brings us back to the question, what is the Directorate? So at the moment we are 3 people, right? And it is foreseen that we grow maybe up to 6 this year, and then maybe up to 10 next year. And this shows you that we have to focus, of course, on our core processes, and that is coordination of the consortia. And it will be up to 30 consortia, which we are coordinating. So despite the fact that I'm a professor for artificial intelligence and data science, and I really love all these topics, probably I won't have much time to teach on that task, and also the other members of my team. Of course, there might be some contributions, but this is not really our core task. So what we really need to empower is to bring in the researchers and the teachers who are capable of giving such lectures, and then structuring the process of doing this in a large scale for the different research disciplines. And there I would foresee that we have some parts of the teaching which is related to how do I access data, for example, and how do I get the right data for my task at hand. And that is partly general in the sense of where do I find research data, how do I deal with these research data, and partly it will be domain specific, because you need to know what are the right research data sets for your particular research domain. And I think the NFDI is in a very good position to bundle such activities and to support such activities, but the teaching itself, this will be part of potentially the members of the associations or of all other professors who are teaching in these areas, who might benefit from having access to materials from other researchers in the NFDI.
I also have a question regarding the selection process. So you mentioned that this is done in a peer review process and that the excellence of an individual consortium is evaluated. At the same time, this is obviously a network, and the individual consortia kind of have to come together. So there are also criteria, obviously, that are outside the content of an individual consortium. Can you explain these criteria in a nutshell?
Okay, so the DFG from the very beginning had to set up a process which was a non-standard process, and this has to do with the simple fact that it is not a purely that the criteria are not only based on excellence. So of course your proposal has to jump over a threshold. So you need to be an excellent consortium, of course. But included in the criteria is also this idea that the NFDI should cover all kinds of different research areas, and that at the end of the day, after 3 rounds, we want to have a complete picture of the disciplines in Germany. And therefore, part of the discussions for selecting consortia is how well are we covering already the research areas in Germany. Now, after the first round, probably it's a bit too early to really judge how complete are we. And if you really look into the consortia that are currently in the run to the funding, then you see that not all areas will be covered by this round. So there's improvement in some research areas which have not yet been covered. But also there are other areas who already are being covered, but maybe there's room for further improvement by other consortia, adding other complementary topics to the whole picture. And after round 3, of course, this will be then the day of truth, where you hopefully can see that these 30 consortia are really covering all the research areas. And from having seen how many consortia are in the line of running up, I'm quite optimistic that we can achieve the goal that at the end of the day, we really cover the broad spectrum of research areas in Germany.
There's one more question by Claudia Traxel.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for a very nice talk. Actually, you advertised the NFDI so nicely, such that given our audience, our very international audience here, you may expect that now, I don't know, NIST and Kyoto University or Shanghai University want to become members. So, but in other words, so how many members do you expect and who should this be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. I would certainly welcome international members as well, because our mission is to become a relevant player also in the international scene and to network with other relevant partners. So from that basic idea that we follow an open approach for all the organizations of the consortia, it became clear from the very early on that we have at least a 3-digit number of members, and we have to deal with that. So our processes have to scale up to be ready to work with this amount of partners. And therefore, I would really welcome if we could also include the international perspective in this area.
Okay.
I would have one more question. You briefly mentioned on kind of the habit or kind of this traditional attitude of kind of sticking to your data, that it's sort of yours, and there's some reluctance. Of course, this is very much field dependent or community dependent to sort of let go and sort of let other people work on your data. And don't get me wrong, I'm all in for open data, but this is probably the most common concern that is raised. But sort of, and one specific fear is that if you provide your data, and of course this is very specialized data, so only domain knowledge is not enough. You really need expert knowledge to sort of deal with this data typically, that you have some responsibility that sort of no nonsense comes out of your data. And sort of, because we see this in social media or sort of in the public news, that sort of misinformation widely spreads, and sort of it just takes more time to erase false information rather than publishing correct data. So there's a fear that while you give your data, you're also a bit responsible that sort of it's not abused. What is your take on this?
Yeah, this is a big question, right? Of course, research data can be used for all kinds of different purposes. And this is one of the responsibilities we have as researchers, to at least think about the potential so-called dual use of research data. And in my professional past, I have seen that over the past 5 to 10 years, this question has been raised more and more seriously. Whereas as a very young researcher, frankly spoken, I was never being asked what could be a dual use of your research. And being a researcher in artificial intelligence, I can say, well, there's lots of dual use for all that stuff, and we see it happen now, right? We see all kinds of things that personally, I would disagree with on. And of course, this can be generalized to all kinds of different research data. So yes, we need to do, we need to have this discussion, and luckily there are these discussions. This is usually including also an ethical perspective. And in the social sciences, where I have some more knowledge, one of the strategies to think about this to include ethical boards to decide on what is, for example, the access level to a particular data set. Open data, from my perspective, does not mean that all the data is openly available for download for anyone on the internet. Open data to me means that the right people get access to the right data for the right task. So there is potentially a certain control mechanism or registration mechanism that is needed to access certain data. And we need to be sure that we understand what are the answers to the questions that you raised for particular data sets. And then we are able to assign the right access class to such a data set and to have some control mechanisms in place.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are two more comments in the Q&A section. First of all, Jim Won announces that NIST will reach out to you, which is a good thing.
Excellent.
And also there's a question, and that's also a good point, if the website of the NFDI could be made available in English as well, which for international context is probably also a good thing. So